Okay, so let's get started. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We wanted to have a conversation about that to bring awareness of all the activities that are happening and how the community can participate in those activities. So my name is Megan Dayton. I'm a senior demographer for the state of Minnesota. I sit on the political council for the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees, and I am currently running for statewide president of MAPE, the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees. Today, I have with me Sarah Super and Asma Mohammed, and we are going to talk about sexual assault in the state of Minnesota, around the nation, what they've been doing. So let's just jump right in. Sarah and Asma, would you mind introducing yourselves?
Sure. Sarah, you want to go first?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Super. I am a rape survivor and the founder of Break the Silence, which is an advocacy organization I founded after I was assaulted. I have, in the past 5 years, been working with Asma as a board member and as a team member to do a few things. One, to change policy statewide. Two, to build the nation's first permanent memorial to honor victims, survivors of sexual violence in Boom Island Park in Minneapolis. And also we've hosted community truth-telling events and public demonstrations to help bring our community together to dismantle rape culture.
Hi, everyone. My name is Asma Mohammed. I'm the advocacy director at Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, and I'm a board member at Break Silence. And I'm a survivor, and Sarah and I met because I needed some support and reached out, and then we ended up becoming friends and allies and working really hard at the Capitol together. So we'll tell you more about that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Well, let's just jump right in because we touched on that a little bit, but can you tell me a little bit more about the work that you've been doing at the Capitol?
Yeah. Well, this year we were really hopeful, so it's still kind of raw, but for the past few years, Sarah and I have been working to eliminate the criminal statute of limitations for reporting sexual assault. And it was through a conversation, Sarah and I sat down and she was like, we were just like thinking about like what we could do. Sarah was like, what do you think about eliminating statute of limitations? Other states have done it. And from there, we just kind of jumped in. This year, we asked Ilhan to be our chief author at the House, and Senator Sandy Pappas. And then the next year, which is last year, we asked Aisha Gomez, who was also a freshman representative. And then our chief author last year was Senator Ralph, or was it Senator Hall? Hall. It was Hall. It was Senator Hall. And then this year, same thing. We're still using the same bill. And we had gotten a hearing last year, which was awesome. But things this year are looking kind of dismal.
COVID-19 has really changed and shifted the way I think in which the legislative session has moved forward, but Asma and I still believe that, eliminating the criminal statute of limitations is an important step for Minnesota because it would give survivors the chance to report their experiences at any time in their lifetime if they wanted to. And we see that for a number of valid reasons, the majority of victims of sexual violence choose not to report their experiences to law enforcement. And we support that, and we support those victims who make that choice. But we also see that people in decades following their experiences, such as the adult victims of the Catholic Church or the adult victims of the abuse that happened within the Boy Scouts, that people often choose to may change their minds, and that when they change their mind, they should be given the same rights of an investigation at minimum that other victims experience within the existing window to report. And so it's very hard to prosecute these cases, even when a victim reports it within hours or days of it actually happening. And so as time progresses, of course, it does become even more challenging. But we see this could be a very useful tool, the ability to report, particularly in cases where perpetrators have several victims, which is actually the majority of offenders. Most people who commit this crime once go on to commit this crime more often. And so, you know, if you're looking at demographics, the ratio of victims to offenders is not 1-to-1. And so we're hoping that if people turn to a system for accountability, that they might have a chance in finding that in a way that feels right for them.
And
Yeah,
we talked a little bit more about this. Sorry, I cut you off. We talked a little bit more about this in communities of color specifically. And we know that in communities of color, because we are already targets of so much hate and prejudice, that we are even, I think I would say that we're less likely to report for those reasons. And oftentimes our communities are insular. So for example, I'm from the Muslim community. And when I was assaulted as a 12-year-old, I wasn't going to report. I wasn't ready to report. I don't think people were ready for me to report. And now that I am, right, over 15 years later, I can't. The statute of limitations is done like it was done, you know, after 9 years up to me. And to know that there are other communities of color and other faith communities that have the same experience of being very insular and wanting to take away some of the I guess the stereotypes and prejudice against people in their communities, and then finally feeling that they have the bravery or the courage to step up and report, they can't. So I think this disproportionately impacts those communities as well.
Mm-hmm.
that's a perfect direction. Yeah. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, the existing statute of limitations is about 9 years for most people. And so, in many ways, if we were to change this law this year, the fact that the law doesn't work retroactively, that it only works prospectively for assaults that would happen after the law is in place, technically speaking, that means that we'd really gain the benefits of this law 10 years from now. So it's in many ways a long-term investment. And I think Asma and I are both involved in the movement around criminal justice reform and improving the system at large. And so I think that as we hope to change the system, we also hope to make a different system accessible to victims going forward.
Yeah, I definitely see the overlap here in this discussion of sexual assault and other historically disproportionate impacts on Black and Brown communities or communities of faith that are non-Christian. So that's a really interesting topic there. I also wondered, while we're talking about disproportionate impacts for particular communities, I wonder, you know, we know that that both male and female people are sexually assaulted, but I wonder, you know, there's the non-binary community, there's also the queer community. Do you know, even anecdotally, do you know how this impacts that community specifically?
I believe the number, and granted, most numbers are always underreported, right? There's really not a clear picture of how often this happens because of the lack of reporting. But we see that women tend to be assaulted at a much higher rate than men do, though girls and boys, so people under the age of 18 or children, seem to be assaulted at very high rates. Women of color are more often assaulted than white women. Native women are assaulted. 1 in 3 Native women are raped in their lifetime, and 1 in 2 trans folks are assaulted in their lifetime as well. And so again, those numbers paint a horrifying picture as they are just as statistics, but at the same time, we have to recognize that those statistics might not also paint the picture of how pervasive this actually is.
Yeah, and I think that even in hearing so from non-binary folks and LGBTQ folks, that there's so much stigma around what sexuality and sex have to do with one another, that a lot of the times the actual reality where rape is about power is conflated with the idea that rape is about sex and sexuality. So there's so much stigma around reporting there too, that I think that it's underreported in every community, right? But I think it's really underreported in non-binary and queer communities as well.
That's a really interesting addition. I think that adds richness to the conversation about how it's a power issue, really. It's not a sexual issue. And I think that's the direct tie into the other gaps that we have, the racial gaps, the religious gaps, just the identification gaps that we have that are particularly strong in Minnesota, stronger than any other state. And it's a lack of power, but it's also the feeling of power being taken from the perpetrator, right? And they are acting upon that in a violent way. And that's what we see happen in sexual assault. That's fascinating. I'm glad we brought that up. So in this, when this is happening to people, what resources do they have, or what should people be aware of who are watching this?
I mean, yeah, one really great one, if you're in Minnesota, we have a group for survivors. So I would say reach out to local advocacy groups. Break the Silence is one great one. We have a space for survivors. It's just for us. Others are the Sexual Violence Center. They offer therapy for survivors as well. And there are a ton of options for therapy. And one thing I'd like to note is that because there are not very many therapists of color employed at a lot of different, we hear of so many places offering like walk-ins and walk-in therapy. There are therapists of color that we can recommend to you. So if you reach out to one of those advocacy groups, that I think they're happy to set you up. And then Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, we do healing circles for Muslim women that are survivors of sexual violence. So that's like a very specific, group, but we do that because we know that spaces for us are important and that are just, created to be safe for us, that are important.
Yes, and every state has their own coalition against sexual assault and domestic violence. And here in Minnesota, we have two coalitions. We have one specifically, Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or MNCASA is the acronym. And then Violence Free Minnesota is a coalition of advocacy agencies that support domestic violence victims. And of course, we know that there's a clear intersection of sexual violence within the context of intimate partnerships. But you can find, if you're a victim survivor, you've experienced sexual violence, you can go to mincasa.org and find kind of an advocate or an advocacy agency that's closest to you wherever you are in Minnesota.
And MNCASA also offers prevention training, is that right?
That's true, yeah.
That's a great resource for employers, maybe to put their managers through, or even employees to take, or general citizens should look into that as well, right?
And then Sarah and I also offer sexual assault prevention trainings and sexual harassment trainings and seminars for folks. So we've done them for a lot of local community groups. And another resource that I would consider that I think is that we don't talk about enough is we do have the walk-in counseling option that I mentioned before. But there are county groups. So depending on which county you live in, there are, for example, Ramsey County does a really great job of supporting survivors, whereas Hennepin County is not doing as well. So depending on the county you live in, you'll have an SOS group, so a sexual assault response group or service provider group. And they offer anything from counseling and helping you figure out whether or not you want to report, and just more resources that they'll just give you the option, and they don't require you to report if you go to them.
That's great. And how can folks reach out to you if they want to have both of you or either of you come train them?
Yeah, the Break the Silence page is a great place. And I think Sarah and I are pretty open and public about who we are and what we do. Mm-hmm. So we're to reach out in that way as well.
Sarah, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say our website is breakthesilence.org. And also, email, Facebook, social media. Asma and I both are pretty active in those ways, just to connect to other people who experience similar things. But I was going to say, in terms of resources, to go back to your previous question, that I think often we turn to, a crisis line is always a useful thing to know that someone is available to talk to you just with whatever you're going through 24/7. But I often think that what's not often recognized in the need for victim survivors is the support from family and friends. That it's so often, I think so often after I was raped, there were people, my loved ones, who wanted to just like pass me off to a nonprofit to like have them like deal with my pain. And I think what's really important, and what I hope, if you've never been sexually assaulted, whether you've been assaulted or not, that everyone recognizes that the support and love and validation that comes from a family, a friend, a community member really matters too. So that, you know, when we're thinking about giving resources to loved ones, it's important that we know that these advocacy organizations exist throughout Minnesota, but I think it's also really important that friends and family know what it means to be trauma informed or what it means to be victim centered, and so that we can become better resources for each other in the aftermath of this experience.
That's really great input, and part of the reason that we wanted to do this video to chat with you today, because whether we are survivors or victim advocates or the general uninformed public, sometimes it's good to have this information to know what we can do to help, to not try to pass off that discomfort of the situation onto maybe a professional, or to just kind of dodge the situation. So it's really important to me and to the campaign that I'm running, that people know about these resources. They're aware that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. It impacts male, female, non-binary, white, Black, brown, Christian, Muslim. It impacts everybody. And so I want to thank both of you for this honest and informative and rich conversation that we had today. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Asma.
Thank you.
Thank you.